I work for Humana, certified ethical hacker, licensed pen tester. Been working in information security for probably a little over 6 years. For a while, I spent a lot of time reviewing acquisitions. And I haven't done it as much lately, but I always thought this was a good topic and something that a lot of companies don't think about. So I thought it'd be good for a presentation.
Thanks. I'm Scott MacArthur. I've been working with Mitch for several years now. I've been in information security for 6 or 7 years as well. And I work on the assurance function in information security, and I focus primarily on acquisitions. So that's basically all I do right now. We talk about security of acquisitions. You know, the title of this presentation is Acquisitions, your latest zero game. The concept behind that is, you know, when you acquire a new company, all of their vulnerabilities, all of their flaws, their threats, their exposures, you now own them, and they're yours. And so, you know, any things that they have out there, they're now yours, and it's up to you to understand them, find them first, and then remediate. So that's kind of what we're going to be talking about today.
Yeah, I think one of the other things that's kind of largely lost when we talk about risk and acquisition is the fact that generally it's the bigger company buying the smaller company. That kind of goes without saying, but bigger companies, just by nature of being bigger, have larger risk associated. So, you know, when we talk about Humana, we're not really going to share many specifics, but if you think about any company Humana buys, it's most likely going to be smaller, and, you know, not a Fortune 70 company. So, by virtue of us acquiring other companies, you know, they may have cut a lot of corners in compliance. They may have, you know, done things very simplistically. They may have, you know, skimped on security. They may have skimped on IT infrastructure, you know, because they're trying to get sold. But now that you've kind of acquired that, you're stuck with all those, you know, demons in the corner that you've got to kind of come back and clean up. And a lot of times that risk is assumed blind. So, you know, the goal of our presentation is to kind of give you a framework on how to review that risk and get a good understanding of it, get executives to understand it, and then ensure that you've got the right sponsorship leadership to remediate it. So that's sort of a high level of the review, though, the presentation, our agenda. We'll talk through our phases, the goals, so why are we even doing this? Which a lot of times we actually get that question. You know, why are you here? You know, we're HIPAA compliant already. And, you know, we'll talk about why that's maybe a stretch. Minimum necessary, that's a concept that we've been working on. We'll kind of explain the technical testing, interviewing, reporting, how we kind of close out our review, wrap it up, integrate into our business, and the risks, and then kind of the value when we're done. So let's talk about the goals. So, you know, one of the first goals of an acquisition from an information security standpoint is to understand the risk, right? I mean, I think we can all agree at a high level, if we don't know the risk of that business, we can't properly mitigate it or manage it or anything of that nature. And then a lot of times, you know, your business people are very savvy when it comes to acquiring a business because they give you this new opportunity or they integrate well, but they don't really think about the IT that much, and then they, you know, what little bit of the IT they spend thinking about security is next to nothing. And I think a lot of this also is true for privacy if your business is in that arena.
And I mean, a lot of these companies, they won't even have a security staff. I mean, you know, if you look at, you know, a company that's the size of Humana, I mean, we might have, you know, over 100 different people in security across, you know, several different areas, right? But like a smaller company, if you get into like a different arena, like a PCP or like a clinic situation, they may have a small IT staff to help their thin clients and things like that. But when you say, when you talk to your security officer, it's also the chief cook and bottle washer, right? It's like, yeah, I was told by HIPAA that we have to have a CISO. That's me. I can barely spell security, but, you know, a lot of times these guys, they don't even, you know, there is no security staff, so that's kind of important to recognize that they might not even understand some of the concepts that you're going to be talking about.
I think a lot of times when you look at smaller companies, when they think of security, they think of accounts. They think of, you know, setting up accounts and deleting accounts. They don't think about making sure their website's secure and the infrastructure is secure and patches and everything like that. They're like, yeah, I set up accounts, so I'm a security person. But yeah, so we want to develop an integration strategy. You know, our goal of our review is to kind of try to understand their security framework, if they even have one. I mean, a lot of times they'll have one without realizing it, right, by virtue of the technology they're using. But understand the technology they're using, the people and the processes, and figure out how that blends with what you have. You know, so Humana as an organization, right, we've got our high-level security policies, and sometimes we need to adapt them for acquisitions. Our goal would be that every acquisition would acquire, would adopt our security framework. But a lot of times, especially if we're in a new business space, our security framework isn't as mature, so we need to use that as an opportunity to kind of advance that. And then understanding compliance risk. I think this goes universally across any business. Every business needs to be compliant with something. There's probably that etc. probably represents more than than the few we listed. But you need to understand what that business needs to be compliant with. That way you can make sure they are. So the phases of the review. This is kind of the high level of what we're going to talk through here. So the pre-close and due diligence. This is usually where, for a while, we struggled with, and we were let out a lot in the due diligence phase. I can say we're doing much better, and I don't think anything recently has come to mind that we haven't been part of due diligence. But originally, we just get kind of lumped in with IT. They'd be like, yeah, IT people answer the security questions, and we're like, no, that's not going to work. So we actually started out by developing questionnaires, and for a while, those questionnaires went with our IT people during due diligence. And it's kind of matured now to a point where we're actually at the table. And that's exciting because this gives us an opportunity up front to know what businesses we're getting involved in. This always requires an NDA, but that's okay. And this allows us to be part of the budgeting process. Because what we found a lot of times is if we weren't involved with due diligence, security wasn't budgeted for. They're like, yeah, IT, that's like $50 million to change it. And they may not realize that we need another $5 million maybe to do security work. So they were just kind of lumping it in based on what they knew. One other thing we've done in this area to help with budgeting, we sort of have our security framework, if you will, around the budgets, and we know what technologies we would want to put in. So we've got a cost calculator, and it says, our different security tools, our antivirus, and this is how much it costs per seat, and then they plug in the number of people they have that work for them. So this gives us, if it's very rough, it's never going to be exact, but this gives us a very rough number to understand what we're working with.
One of the other things that I think we probably could have added on here too, it's an area that's a little bit new for us that we're trying to help the business understand real risk, right? So when the M&A team comes in, they're evaluating a target, right? And they say, this is going to help our bottom line, it's going to help us get into new markets, it's going to be able to enable us to buy a license to sell, Medicare for California, which we haven't been able to do. One of the things that they're not thinking about, obviously, is the whole security risk behind this. And so when Mitch and I and our acquisition teams have had a seat at that due diligence table, we're able to go on site prior to close, right? So we haven't acquired the company yet, but we still get to go on site. And we run through, and we'll talk about OCR a little bit, the Office of Civil Rights, but we go through and do a review based on OCR that gives us an idea of how compliant this company would be to the HIPAA regulation, right? And so if this is a health plan, or if it's a PCP or a clinical office, we can come back and get back to our senior leadership on the business side and say, all right, look, you guys are about ready to acquire this company, and we did a cursory review of their security policies, practices, and standards, and they are failing the HIPAA compliant, the HIPAA standard by 75%. So it gives them one more little piece of information that they can have to say, all right, we're going to make a go, no-go decision on this. So it's not all about money. And what we're trying to do in security is get our senior leaders aware that, look, HIPAA is really, really important to humanity. If you look at, the WellPoint breach, right, where it was a very small number of records, but it was a high dollar amount. I mean, maybe not the company, it was like 1.5 or something like that $1 million. But if we can give our senior leadership a look at what is their overall compliance before we buy them, it's just one more data bit that they can have to make a go-no-go decision.
Yeah. So the pre-assessment requirements is very important to cover during the due diligence period. That sort of lays out with the company you're acquiring what you need and what you plan on doing post-close. So our goal post-close is to be in there week one. We want to be on site as early as possible. During due diligence, they're only going to be so forthright. They're going to be as forthright as they need to be to close the deal, but there's still that lingering, risk that the deal doesn't come through. So they don't want us to have all the cards. So generally what that means is everything we're doing is conversation-based interviews, no technical testing at this point. So we want to have a pre-assessment requirements. So we want to get network diagrams, which sometimes they won't share until close, org charts, We want to understand who does what in the organization. We want to have an interview schedule laid out, and we want to start to make our requirements for our technical testing. This allows us when we go on site, Scott's going to talk about this, but you never get what they say they're going to give you, right? Anyone who's done an audit knows that. So you say, I need 5 hours, they're like, I got 30 minutes. So, we'll generally make a schedule at this point and slot people in based on topics, and, it's a schedule, right? It's a plan, but it's not very so post-close, and I think we'll talk about this more in depth, so I'm going to kind of just cursory talk about that. We have different marks, and the minimum necessary, which I think is the next slide, talks about this, but post-close, we want to have a clear strategy for different phases. So week one is what do we need to do right away to secure them? Part of that is determined based on the pre-due diligence, and then part of it's determined what we figure out when we're on site. There may be some glaring vulnerability, SQL injection on their, an or1=1 SQL injection on their main website that we obviously couldn't find out from interviewing them, but now we got to get it fixed right away. Month one, and then we sort of roll through other periods.
All right, so we're going to talk about minimum necessary here. And Mitch kind of mentioned minimum necessary is basically this concept of, all right, so we've closed now, we've acquired the company, this company is now a or whichever company, subsidiary. Your risks are our risks, your vulnerabilities are our vulnerabilities, everything that you have out there on the internet is now ours, and we are at stake. So the minimum necessary is before we start merging your network to our network and start combining these companies, opening up ports between a firewall or a VPN, or we're going to do some sort of BS3 and get them integrated in with our MPLS cloud. We have some baseline requirements that you have to meet before we bridge those networks, because we're not going to assume all of your risk blindly. All right. And so what we've done is we've separated it up into about I think it's right now like 11 or 12 different areas that the company has to meet our expectations on before we can start bridging networks. So we talk about encryption. All of your laptops and desktops have to be encrypted. Week one, right? And we'll get to that because week one for a 200-person company is a lot different than week one for a 10,000-person company. So we talk about web filters. We talk about data loss prevention. If I take a thumb drive and stick it into this computer, can I copy, PHI database and move it over to this thumb drive and walk out without that being encrypted? And then we talk about, firewalls and what your firewall rule says. How many internet connections do you have? We look at your antivirus. So there's about 12 different things that we look at. And each one of those has a specific requirement that you have to meet week one. Week two, or it's week one, and we get month one. A lot of those requirements get repeated, so we still talk about firewalls, we still talk about encryption, we still talk about web filters, but now we're going to be moving into stricter requirements. So whereas in week one we said everything has to be encrypted, month one we say, all right, now everything has to be encrypted, but if it's a laptop or it's a desktop computer that is at an associate's home, you have to have pre-boot authentication, right? And then we talk about this concept of separate but equal. Week one, if we look at a company, and let's just say that Humana uses Trend Micro, and that company uses McAfee, that is an industry standard, recognized antivirus software. So we say, it's not what we want, it's not what we use, but it's equal, right? We're going to say, all right, we're not going to focus on your antivirus solution. But when you say we don't have encryption and we have to have a certain brand of encryption that we use, that's not separate but equal, so we're going to focus on that because it's high up on our minimum necessary requirements.
I think one thing to think about when you make these minimum necessary requirements, everyone's business is different, everyone's requirements are different, and everyone's risk appetite is different. Our requirements were laid out kind of with our privacy office and our security officers, and everyone's kind of getting everyone's risk tolerances and our compliance needs. So I think what you really want to do is define the minimum necessary that works for your business, and that it's based on your control framework and based on your risk. We'll talk about how we landed here, but I think that's just important, something to keep in mind.
Yeah, I mean, if you're in the business of selling tires, it may not be a requirement for you all that you have encryption on every desktop and laptop. You have to have pre-boot authentication. You got to have DLP controls. You got to have web filters that block everything.
PCI is going to be really
whatever. Yeah, you may just have to be worried about PCI. It goes back to those. What are you required to attest to as far as government regulations? And then we go into moving to common security platforms as we move from week 1 to month 1 to month 2. That's when we say, all right, we were separate but equal. We had Trend, you had McAfee, but guess what? You're coming on board because now we can do, we can get a better deal on Trend than you can get from McAfee because you're a 200-person company, we're a 40,000-person company. We're going to get a much better deal for more bang for our buck, economies of scale, right? So we're going to start moving you over to all of our technologies.
And operational efficiency.
Exactly. So it's like, you've got your chief cook, bottle washer, and then he's also your network admin and web developer. Well, guess what? We're going to take away, worrying about encryption. We're going to take away worrying about McAfee and all these other technologies from you, so you can focus on the web. And because we're much better at it, right? Because we've got the resources to do it. And then, so when is it appropriate to start opening up more and more connections? So during at least for us, week 1, we go down there and we start doing technical scanning. So we go down with our technical scanners. If you've heard of like Nessus, I'm sure you've heard of. We'll go down with Nessus-like equipment and scan their networks and their operating systems, their servers, their switches, and all these. We look for vulnerabilities. We come back with a report. We have defined like a level of acceptable risk, right? And so if we say that, all right, on a scale from 1 to 10. We have to have a 4 before you guys can start bridging connections into Humana, right? And now they're going to get a 6, and that means maybe they don't have Windows, update turned on, or maybe they just have never patched an Adobe file in their life, or they've got Java that goes back 6 years that they don't patch. So we start working on getting all that patched until we can bring them down to like 4. And once they're at a 4, then we can say, all right, you're good there. We can start bridging more connections. And then, so again, but it's with the databases, we scan their databases for vulnerabilities. We scan their websites for vulnerabilities. And again, it's at what level are we equal? And then once we reach that equal point, then we can start opening up more and more connections.
So just one thing to add there. In terms of opening connections, each phase and kind of the minimum necessary enables the business to do something. So we don't want to seem just like a brick wall. We'll go for the firewall Swiss cheese model and let you start punching holes. So for example, in week 1, once you're encrypted, we may say you can do 80 to 443 with us. We may not want to enable Windows file sharing because that opens up a whole other can of worms. But we'll let you start sharing web content.
Well, and then even for like some of our worst acquisitions, I don't want to say worst, even for some of our most vulnerable acquisitions, opportunities, yeah. We'll even open up like right away, like if they're on like Exchange 2010, we're on Exchange 2010. One of the biggest complaints from our acquired companies is I can't read your calendar. Even free busy time. How am I supposed to be scheduling meetings with Humana, which we're going to be doing all the time now that we're just acquired, and we can't even look at your calendar? So we looked at that. We kind of did a review of, what is really the risk of like calendar, free busy time federation. And it came back and we said, there really is not a whole lot of risk between federating just free busy time. So if they're on the same technology platforms as us, we'll say even week 1, if you guys really want calendar federation, we got a group here, we're going to start federating free busy time. And that's been a huge win for the business because it's like this big sigh of relief, and it's like, oh my gosh, no, I don't have to spend an hour just to schedule a meeting, which is really nice. And so, kind of our strategy during this whole thing is just making sure that the acquired company understands what minimum necessary is, what they're about to get into, understanding that you guys may have a security platform, you may have a security process, you may have some of these things in place, but you're now Humana, right? And your policies may be great. You may have good encryption, but you're Humana. And again, we talk about economies of scale. You will be moving to our technologies 99% of the time. I guess there's probably been a couple of exceptions, but just the communication up front and just laying down, the understanding that we're going to use you, as long as you guys are willing to help us and work with us. We need your help, right? Because we can't take Mitch and I and sit them down in an acquisition for 6 months and get them all fixed. That's not what we're here for. Well, yeah, we'll get to that. But you know, we want to work with you guys, but you know, just understanding up front that you're going to be moving to, you know, the Humana or the Ford or the UPS, whatever you work for, you're going to be working on our framework now, and that's very important that you get that message set at the front, so that, you know, 6 months down the road, you're not still fighting about, well, you know, we're a McAfee shop, you're a Trent shop, or, you know, we use Kaspersky, whatever. No, it's like we lay the law down kind of at the very beginning, and that way it makes it easier going forward, because we've had trouble with that. So we talk about our experience. We've had a couple acquisitions where it's been nonstop battles, right? It's been like day after day, week after week, months. I mean, even like a year later on some of these acquisitions, it's like, you know, oh, we really, you know, we use Landesk to do all of our, you know, asset inventory, and it's like, but you know what? But TrueCrypt is a really, really good encryption product, and it's free. And my bottom dollar, my bottom line, my bonus is based on me not spending any money, right? So like it works. You know, it's encryption. It's strong encryption. I use it at home. I think it's good too. It's free. It's not a good corporate, you know, solution for Humana. And so, but we've had constant struggles, and that's why I get back into the day one, week one, laying down that line and letting them know that, you know, this isn't really an option. It's not a choice. You know, we'll talk to you about how to migrate from your security tools to our security tools, but that communication is critical. Otherwise, you'll be 6 months down the road and still fighting about things that we shouldn't be arguing about. All right. So yeah, this is the fun part, at least for us, because we're kind of geeks. You know, when we go down there, we do our interviews, and Mitch is going to talk about the interview process and our program. But what we do is a lot of technical testing. So first thing we do is we set up our goal for this. And our goal, again, is to really understand what the risk is for Humana as we are acquiring a new company. And so we look at their websites, we look at their databases, we look at their networks and their PCs, right, and their laptops. And so we say, what is enough? Really, we look at it all.
That's a changing bar, right?
and the bar does change. So for example, let's just say we look at a company that's got a lot of websites. Our primary objective is to cover those websites that are external, public to the internet, and contain sensitive information, right? And so some of the tools that we use to scan these websites may take quite a bit of time to run through, and they kind of act as a hacker, and they go in and they try to do SQL injection, cross-site scripting, all the post-dated query injections, all that sort of thing. Comes back and gives us a nice meaty report and says, here's all the flaws that you have. But if their only website is like a brochureware website, and it's hosted at like Rackspace, and it's basically, you know, you go there and it's a static page, and it's a picture of, hey, you know, we sell health insurance. We spend less time worrying about that than we do on the back end, where they may have their call center where they're taking in, you know, member data, and they've got these massive databases of all the encounter information, claims information, credit card information, maybe they're taking credit card payments. We're going to spend a lot more time focusing on those systems and on those databases than we would on their websites.
A few other things we look at that I think is important that we don't call out here. Copiers. So people may have seen that story, I think it was ABC News did a few years ago, where they went to a warehouse and bought used copiers and then pulled all the data off the hard drives because they weren't encrypted. So once that story broke, that became part of our review plan, right? It was like, now we got to make sure their copiers are encrypted. Wi-Fi. Right? We want to make sure that they don't just have a Linksys router in the corner. I think one company we acquired, their DR plan was if they ever had a problem, they had a Wi-Fi router on the edge of the windowsill, so they could, add it back in the building, they could see what was going on in the parking lot. They're like, isn't that a great idea? And we're just like, yeah.
But yeah, so we try to look at 30,000-foot view of all technology that has the potential of interacting with sensitive information. That's really the kind of the scope. We're going to talk about QA versus production, because we talk a little bit about databases and websites. When you do a database scan, basically the tools that are out there, a lot of times what it does is you give it an account that has SA type privileges, and it goes in and it's gonna run a lot of queries against the database, right? It's gonna say, all right, show me a list of all your users, show me a list of all your users that have this function, and it does some sort of segregation of duties checking and things like that. It looks at how the server's configured, that you have default passwords turned on, so it's a lot of querying. And so what we do for databases is we do that on production, because we need to know in production what's going on in those databases so that it comes back and it says default SA password is enabled, or an easily guessed password, or password same as username. We can go in and really quickly make those changes because that poses a significant risk.
And everyone knows that QA always matches production, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And so that's good for production. Now when we get to websites, it gets a little bit dicier. Because when you do a vulnerability scan of a website, I can't just go query the website and say, give me your settings. It's because it's either hand coded or it's coded using tools like a development environment or something like that. So when we scan it as if the tool were a human, and going in and filling out forms. It clicks all the links. So the first thing it's going to do is it's going to spider the whole site and it's trying to find out what is, how big is the site, click all the links, and now we get all these forms. And it's going to go into each one of those forms, right? It's going to do a SQL injection attempt. It's going to do a cross-site scripting attempt. It's going to do, whatever it can to try to execute. And usually what we do is the OWASP top 10. I think OWASP is here today, but they have every year they publish their top 10 list of vulnerabilities, like the most critical web-based vulnerabilities, and the tools that we use that as a guide for doing these tests. The problem is, so let's just say that it fills out a form and it's trying to do SQL injection, for example, and then it submits the form, and then on the back end of that form, it takes all that information, dumps into a production database. Well, now we're going to be, and this tool can do that hundreds of times, right?
You email someone every time it does that.
Oh yeah, someone's going to get 100 emails because they fill out this form and then it sends an email off to the administrator saying, hey, we've got a new customer that wants to sign up for service. Well, their inbox is going to get flooded. And it does this 100 times because there's 100 different vulnerabilities to check. So now we've dumped 100 records of junk information into their production database. So we really like to do this in a QA environment or a test environment. And usually the way I approach that is because Mitch's point is right on. It's like QA always matches production, right? Well, that never happens, especially for some of these smaller companies. The one I'm working on right now,
Or they develop production.
they don't have a test environment. They don't even have a QA environment. He's like, no, I write some code on my machine, I copy and paste the code, bam, it's out there on the internet. And so usually what I do, that's real good. So usually what I do, even if they say, yeah, I got a test, I got a QA, I'll ask if they can spin up a copy of their production environment on another URL. And that way I know I'm getting a fresh copy, it's on a fresh copy of the database, and I'll run it there. That way I know, with some assurance that the code base is going to be the same so that anything I find here would be replicated in production. If you find something really egregious, I usually go back and retest it manually in a production environment. So if I get like a cross-site scripting vulnerability. So let's jump down to our experience. One of our past acquisitions, we were doing a review of one of our companies, and I think it was even before we even started rolling out the tools. We kind of look at the website, and when you do this enough, you pull up their website, and you can look at it, and you can tell right away whether or not it's going to be vulnerable. Because first of all, if it ends in like .asp and it's a black and white website with black wireframe HTML tables, and you look at the code, it looks like this is somebody straight out of like high school that learned perfect, properly formatted. It's like everything is tabbed over, and I got all my quotes in the right place. They're very, very keen on making sure they're a good web developer. Right? Like that does not make you a security expert. And it doesn't mean that you understand that, like, why can't I just send the username across in a URL, and then, hey, I'm logged in now. But, meanwhile, Mitch can take that and he can put his name in the URL instead of mine, and now we're logged into his, right? But so we came across one of these websites where we just knew, right? And Mitch talked about the or 1 equals 1. Are you guys familiar with SQL injection? So basically, the idea is that I can inject a piece of SQL code into the query string and see if I can get that to get executed on the server, on the back end. And so when we say or 1 equals 1, we do an apostrophe, and that usually stops the SQL line that's going to get passed to the database. And we say or 1 equals 1, hyphen, hyphen. And hyphen, hyphen is basically a comment. It says ignore the rest of this string. So if you're on a login form, and you got username and password, and I inject that into the username field, if you translate it to SQL, it's going to typically it'll say something like select star from table users where, and then they have a quote, and then they're going to put in their own feedback, the input, user input, and then another quote, and then all the other parameters, like in their password equals this or whatever. Well, if I put in a quote right there that's saying select star from table users where username equals blank, right? And there's probably not going to be any blank usernames. And then I continue to say or 1 equals 1. Well, the very first time that piece of code gets executed, 1 is going to equal 1. And so it's going to pass. The test, right? So it doesn't even matter about your password because hey, 1 equals 1. So I'm going to execute that, and that means I'm going to pull the first user out of the database. So if you're a database administrator, you've created this database and you're doing testing. Who is the first person that's going to be in the database? Administrator, right? And so what we did when we found this really basic looking website was we did the whole or 1 equals 1, and sure enough, we were logged in and it said welcome administrator. And this was a system that did what was it, like member claims, or it had access to their full database, public on the
Important
internet.
stuff.
It was just it was like 2 seconds. I mean, I think Mitch and I could do that or 1 equals 1 in our sleep right now, but it just kind of drives the point home. Like when we showed that to our leadership and to their IT. It's like, here's me logged in as an administrator, here's all of your member records. And it kind of like
gets a lot scary.
If you want to get stuff done at an acquisition, a lot of times shopping all is the best way. It's like, here's all of your member records. And this has played out recently, but it did years ago when we did that as well.
Yeah. So one other story about technical testing. Say we come in, we want to do our vulnerability scan, and we look at their network diagram, and we kind of get a lay of their network segmentation. So we were like, all right, we're going to scan this VLAN, fire everything up, and I don't know, maybe 10, 15 minutes later, their entire network's down. We're like, oh crap, what do we do? So they're like, no, I don't understand why that happened. They're like, all right, we'll just kind of move it to another segment and try again. And the whole thing happens again. And by the way, this also includes their public-facing internet. So now we're not only bringing down their business and their call center, we're bringing down their whole web presence. So going back to our earlier discussion about getting your documentation, it's really important that the documentation is right. So in this case, there was a firewall missing, and that firewall was everything was flowing through that firewall, literally. So we got to 50,000 connections, and it puked. And they power cycled it came back up, and it was fine until we did it again. So yeah. I think Scott's got a funny story about a phone network he crashed.
It's really not fun. and I don't want to spend too much time on it because I know that we've got more of the presentation to go to. But again, making sure that you got the right documentation. If you've got a network diagram, don't just take it at face value. Make sure you sit down with the network administrator because he would have looked at that and said, wait a second, we got a firewall that's missing here that all of the traffic for the entire company runs through. You may end up choking this, really, really small firewall at that time, or router, or whatever it was. And the same thing goes for phone systems. We ended up scanning the phone system and brought down their entire phone structure. But that was their whole business, was operating on phones. And it was because of an older switch that wasn't able to handle it. Again, 50,000 connections, what do I do? Run away, I'm going to shut down. And then their phones die or their networks die or whatever. So it's critical.
And I think one last point about technical testing is the thresholds as to what is risk. Again, work with your organization to determine that. So, some organizations have finding 100 vulnerabilities on a workstation that's unpatched might be okay. At others, it might not be. So, we kind of treat acquisitions as if they were part of us, and we hold them to the same threshold. So, interviewing. The first thing about interviewing, I think any auditor will say, take everything they say with a grain of salt. A lot of times you find that interviewing doesn't match technical testing, so that's when we kind of delve deeper. But we do kind of have a very documented audit program. It's all ISO based, so we go through each domain of ISO. Now, some domains we cover in 2 seconds because it's like security program, we don't have that. All right, well, that's section 0 of ISO done. And then other questions take longer. So, we try to do this in a few days. Basically we go there for a week or less, depending on the size of the organization, and try to get a full flavor of their security program and their controls. So we don't always go very deep. You know, if we ask them, do you have change management, and they say no, well, we're just going to skip 10 questions on change management because there's no sense in asking that. So we kind of make sure that we're doing an audit program that makes sense. We may come in with this, you know, kick-ass binder that's 100 pages. We may only end up asking 10 pages, right? Because we're getting a lot of those. And, you know, I think the other thing when it comes to interviewing, it's just that, you know, you just kind of nod your head and go along with everything they say. They're like really gung-ho that they don't have change management. It's really cool. Because like we could just fix something like right away. You're just like, yeah, we're good. Yeah. So, you know, that's kind of another thing. So one of our favorite stories about interviewing, we were in acquisition, and someone we were talking to had like a very, important self-sense of importance. And, you know, we were asking a lot of questions. We were kind of delving deep in areas, and, you know, kind of based on what we were feeling out. And he goes, well, you know, you never want to fire your systems administrator. He knows all the passwords with like a dead stare. So, yeah, that is always something you want to be aware for, right? Because as much as you're interviewing their controls and their technologies and their security framework, you're interviewing people too. So you need to have a sense of the people and how they fit with the organization. So that was definitely one of our favorite ones, though. You never fire the systems administrator. So needless to say, it didn't last much longer. And, you know, we're still in business, so I guess it worked out. Reporting, so when we're done, we've you know, met with them, we've done our technical testing, we've done our interviews, now we got to put something together. Now we got to kind of represent the risk in a way that, you know, doesn't say SQL injection on so-and-so.aspx, right, where the business is just like gloss over. So what we usually start with is closing meeting. And before we leave, we really want to sit down with them, go through our findings, which unfortunately are usually like 100 plus, and kind of just build consensus. We don't want to leave the site without consensus, because once you're back, you know, in Louisville and they're somewhere else, it gets very hard. You know, you're working over the phone, so you really want to have that you know, closure. So we build that consensus, then we work on writing our report. And our report, you know, we try not to be too technical. We try to really focus on risk. And for the people that are technical, we'll delve deep with them when we need to. But we try to keep the report at a you know, business level. And our strategy's recently changed there. We've kind of gotten away from the report maybe, and got more like a spreadsheet that's like very digestible and very quick and easy for two reasons. One, the business doesn't want to read 100 pages. I don't want to write 100 pages. And also because we can get this to them very fast. If it's just a spreadsheet, it's a lot quicker than having to, you know, proof a whole document. One other thing we do with our reports is we peer review them. So, you know, just a good practice to make sure that you're explaining things in the right way. Make sure you don't make things silly. Right in there. So tracking the issues is kind of the next phase. So now we've got the report, we've got the business to accept it. Now we need to have some formal method of tracking them to remediation. And then, you know, we have retesting after. Let's see. So our favorite story here, and we'll just share one because we want to get through this and have some time for questions. But the magical issues that go away, right? So you find a vulnerability and you talk to them about it, and they're like, yeah, we don't do that. And then like 3 weeks later, you're giving them the spreadsheet like, whoa, we have change management. Did you get all our change management processes? So, you know, there's always those magical ones that you know, just magically are fixed.
And for your point of view too, it's those issues, we still write them up, right? And they still go into our issue tracking system. And that you talked about the spreadsheet. The other reason that we kind of like doing the spreadsheet is we can now like take all those results and just import it directly into our GRC solution, right? So we don't have to like write a report and then individually write each issue up into our GRC solution, so we can just import it. But you know, it's for us, if we identify a risk, it goes in there regardless of whether or not the acquired company looks back, you know, 3 weeks later and says, no, that doesn't exist, you know, these were not the droids you were looking for. And we say, well, at the time it does, it did, you know, and we identified and you agreed, you know, whether it was a technical vulnerability or it was through an interview, it goes into our system. I say, you know what, here's the good news, this is going to be the first one you get to close out. So we got 100 issues and you already got 1, 2, and 3 knocked out because you're going to be able to provide me with evidence now. Like before, Mitch said, you know, we ask a lot of high-level questions. We don't necessarily get into a lot of evidence at the time, you know, because there's so many different things that we have to get into. But when they say, yeah, we don't have a change management system, oh yeah, we got great change management, well now you're going to have to provide evidence, and now you're going to have to provide all that documentation and everything like that too, so we can have that.
So actually going to issue closure, right, we do want to make sure every issue is tied back to something. So if it's a vulnerability, we want to re-vuln scan and find that it's fixed. If it's a process that's delinquent, we want to have a process document that shows it's fixed. Some of them, it's challenging. Some of them we just take an email and says, we fixed this. An example there is a company that was forwarding their calls to Google Voice for after-hours support. We were like, Google Voice is bad, right? Google Voice, they basically own all your data. They're using your conversations to sample and build natural language libraries. So if you say my social security number is 987654321, now they know that's your social security number. So we told this business they couldn't do that. And what kind of evidence do you get for that? It's very challenging. So we just accepted an email. So sometimes that's all you can do.
And another one would be like if we're doing acquisitions where you have to travel, like so there's a lot of flying. So like I do a lot in South Florida. We've been out to California a couple times, and we say we've come up with some like physical security risks, right?
Yeah.
Like there's a mountain of PHI, right? We've called that, like that's kind of like our term in our group is the mountain of PHI, because every company's got one. No matter where you go, you can open the door, you can walk around the corner, there it is, they've been sitting out there. And so it's, we have to get evidence, right? But we can't say like, all right, well, let's spend another $1,000 for us to fly out there and make sure that we don't have the mountain of PHI anymore. So usually what we'll do is we'll take somebody that's in the business and we'll work with them to say, all right, you can go out there because you go out there every other week or whatever it is you're doing business out there, and you can act on behalf of Humana's security department and say, all right, on behalf of Humana's security department, I redid the test, I walked through the facility, it no longer exists. Click, here's a picture of where it was, and you can see that it's no longer there. So that way it saves the company money from us having to go out, and we can still get decent evidence. And now the risk is on that guy's hand. If we ever go out there again and we see the mountain of PHI, or CMS comes through the door and sees the mountain of PHI, and say, look, this gentleman, was acting on behalf of us or whatever. And so far, I mean, we've not been burned by that. I mean, the people that we use are, very, very trustworthy. Yeah, thank you. Very trustworthy and everything. So it's a good way to handle that too.
No problem. Integration.
All right, integration. So now we've gone through, we've done all of our testing and everything like that. We've come up with our issues. We're starting to close out issues. We're going to talk about risks of integration. I think we already kind of covered that a little bit at the beginning where we said, look, your vulnerabilities are our vulnerabilities. Right? If you don't have encrypted laptops, the ones that get stolen, you may be a very, very small company, but Humana's name is going to be in the headlines because we own you, right? And so we've got risks of integrating too quickly because if we can leave them separate, there's less of a probability of our name getting in the headline. But as soon as we start integrating and we own more and more of your technology, there is the assumption that we are only owning more and more of your technology because we're securing more and more of your technology. So we need to make sure that we've got that sort of risk-reward mentality to make sure it says, okay, well, you guys are encrypted, so now we can start bringing some of your laptops and your desktops and things like that. Risk of not integrating, so basically this is more of a cost issue, right? And so we kind of talked about economies of scale, and we've had some incidents in the past with like larger acquisitions where our legal team has said, you know what, for whatever reason, we've got competing customer contracts with this company or whatever the case may be, you are not allowed to integrate with these two companies. So company A is going to be completely separate from Humana. And the risks there are, it is going to cost a ton of money. And here's why, because we are still responsible for securing that company, right? And we're responsible for securing that company up to the same level that Humana secures our company. But if this company is an 80-person company, that means we have to go in with all of our enterprise tools. We have to stand up a whole new AD environment. We have to stand up a whole new encryption environment. We have to stand up a whole new DLP environment. We're going to have to, all of our scanning tools, right? If we use we don't use Nessus, but if we use one of the major players for vulnerability scanning, you can't just leverage our environment because we're separate. You have to go out and purchase all of your new equipment. So the costs become astronomical for an 80-person company. And they throw up their hands and say, "Are you nuts?" So
and then the second part is like operational risk, right? So we change the policy. We used to, let's say, scan for viruses once a day, and now we want to scan for viruses every 12 hours. Well, and then 3 weeks later we go back to once a day. Now we've got more people that are involved in every change, and chances are somebody's going to fall through the cracks at some point.
So, really the value of bringing the companies together and integrating is really, like Mitch said, it's operational opportunities, and then it's also the economies of scale. And Humana has a very, very large, well-diverse security department, and so you can leverage our work that we do and all the SMEs. When we acquire a company, you've got maybe one security guy, and he has to know this much, but we're very broad, and so Mitch may be an SME on AV, I may be an SME on encryption, and we've got 50 different people that specializes on one or two different things, and so it really kind of makes sense to leverage that for the acquired company. So we had that opportunity as well, making sure that first you've accepted the level of risk that they're at, and then really rolling them into your company makes sense. Yeah, we kind of went over that.
So. Yeah, I think we talked about compliance, so we'll kind of skip that. And then I think just kind of closing is really the value of the business, right? That's something we never want to forget. Security isn't what we do, right, to make money in most businesses. So we really just want to make sure we're focused on the value of the business and understand the risk and associated costs. I think they bought this business because they did something really well. We want to enable them to continue to do what that is really well. We understand they need to up their game when it comes to security, but we need to do it at the cost of allowing them to be productive. I think that sort of ties back to Dilbert, right? Was Dilbert, whatever the comic was that was up there, right? Just secure by turning everything on. So that's really not going to work.
Yeah, well, that's a good point, because we're dealing with one right now where they've got a significant vulnerability. But if we were to put in like immediate mitigations, it would stop that business from being able to do business. And one thing that's important to understand is you can't let security stop the business, right? Because we bought them, like Mitch said, for a very specific reason. They must make a lot of money doing whatever they're doing. If we say, all right, I understand you got this vulnerability, I'm terminating it until you can fix it, that's going to be 3 weeks where you can't do business. We're going to be out of business, right? We're going to come down to like, oh, you're going to go work for somebody else now because you just stopped it from doing business. So you have to be able to come up with unique ways of mitigating risk while allowing the business to stay in business.
All right, we got a couple minutes. Any questions? Anyone have a funny story?
As a result of your risk assessments, ever been a deal breaker?
Nope. They've all what?
Postpone deals?
No, I don't think so, really. No. I think they've always said let's say it's a $50 million acquisition. They've always said the business value outstrips whatever we're going to spend on IT. They've never come back once and said, sorry about that. So, yeah. But we have been successful in getting more money and not trying to just slipstream them and getting a higher priority. So I think that's where we've been successful.
Yeah, one of the things that's kind of come up recently since security has had a seat at the table of due diligence is that we are not just like hidden in like an IT cost somewhere, right? So normally it's when we talk about what's the cost of doing this acquisition, you got your business costs, your accounting costs, and then you got like your IT costs. Well, security was always kind of hidden in there, right? And it's like it might be $5 million to secure this, but business leaders never really understood that there was a $5 million security expense. It was just part of the overall IT expense. We kind of separated that out now so that they understand that what we are doing, understand again what we're doing, why we're doing it, to understand and share risk, and then also like what the cost of true security is. That's kind of
and actually to that point, when we were just a sub-bottom IT, a lot of times we would get to the point of spending and be like, that's not budgeted for. We're like, no, it's here, it's good. So, by breaking this out as a separate cost area, it's up front, it's clear, and it maybe sometimes makes it easier to spend. So, yeah.
You mentioned copiers, and
Uh-huh.
a lot of times organizations overlook the copiers. What do you all do from a security standpoint? And I heard you did some scans on phone systems and that sort of thing, but those WAV files on voicemail systems,
Yep.
Contains personal identifying information. What do you do from a security standpoint?
Yeah, so when it comes to the copiers, there are certain vendors like Xerox that are very good when it comes to security. There's other vendors that aren't as good. So sometimes it's a matter of us moving them to a better platform that we know we can control better. Sometimes we can't get the same level of control on the equipment they have. When that's the case, you want to do secure destruction of the hard drives in those units. We've had other acquisitions where we verified that the copiers they had don't have drives, right? There's older copier only, they don't scan fax, make breakfast for you. They're just really basic. So, on those we validate. With voicemail system, we sometimes have encrypted them. Hold disk encryption on the servers. And then, we treat it like any other server. So an example there was, we changed our voicemail as an organization a while ago, and they started emailing you your voicemails. And they were like, oh, that's so cool. But they never really checked the privacy or security to see if, what the risks were for that. And that became a big risk for legal hold. And now all these voicemails that were no longer part of legal hold are now part of our 7-year archive. So, that got shut off. So I think a lot of it just depends on the system. So, one more final question, and I think we're out of time. All right. Thanks everyone.